This fifth session. So now we're answering the question. So we've laid out what the creation model is, and from a modern standpoint, looking at what the evidence says, both in Scripture and in science. And so now we want to see whether it can actually, whether it is scientific enough. Can it withstand scrutiny, and can we make predictions? And in the Bill Nye Ken Ham debate, this was, I don't know, 3 years ago or so. Raise your hand if you saw this debate, or if you heard about it. Okay, a lot more of you heard about it, okay. So Ken Ham is the CEO of Answers in Genesis, where that art display is, where the Creation Museum is. And Bill Nye, of course, is the pseudoscience guy, is what I like to call him, not the science guy. So anyway, in that debate, Bill Nye brought up a lot of, I think, important questions about the creation model that deserved an answer, where he was trying to punch some holes in the biblical model. And for whatever reason, Ken Ham did not answer almost all of those, and it was concerning to me because they were valid enough questions that I think it would shake people up. For whatever reason, Ken Ham didn't even point people to his own website that answers most of those questions. So I feel like because of how he handled himself in that debate, you're going to see more of the arguments that Bill Nye made. We're going to start seeing those more because he left the impression as though we don't have an answer to those. And so I think these are important things to be aware of and know how to respond to, the kind of things Bill Nye brought up. And one of the big things that he brought up multiple times is this idea. Here's what he said to Ken Ham. So far, Mr. Ham, in his worldview, the creation model does not have this capability. It cannot make predictions and show results. The big thing I want from you, Mr. Ham, is can you come up with something that you can predict? You have a creation model that predicts something that will happen in nature. And so he brought this up several times, and Ken Ham did not respond to that. Now, he's not talking about like Bible prophecies where you're foretelling the future. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about scientific predictions. That's the idea that if my theory is right, let's say the theory of gravity, then if I drop this remote, it's going to drop to the ground. Right? So that's a prediction I'm making based on my theory. If you're going to have a valid theory, scientific theory, you should be able to make predictions that can be verified or falsified when you examine the evidence. Right? So that's the argument. And so this is a common argument that is levied against the creation model. They say, this isn't even a scientific theory. You can't even make any predictions. It's not useful. It's not scientific. Why would you teach this in a science class? Because you can't even do science with it. Those kind of arguments. So hopefully you've already seen, just from what we've looked at so far, that is ridiculous. The creation model is loaded with science, and I even intentionally used the word prediction several times throughout the last two sessions. So that you would hopefully, some of you might actually catch on to the fact that the creation model is loaded with the prediction idea. But I wanted to give a few more direct examples that highlight further how the creation model is in fact scientific in this way. It can make predictions that can be verified in nature. So, I just went ahead and probably 20 minutes at the time, whenever I saw that debate, I just probably took 20 minutes and wrote down 30 different predictions that the creation model can make. And so I think that this could easily be doubled or tripled. But that was just in a brief period of time. I just made this big list of scientific predictions that can be made and that can be verified, have been verified based on the biblical model. And there's a copy of Reason and Revelation back there on the Bill Nye Ken Ham debate. That has this stuff in there. The material from this session and the session from tomorrow morning are covered for the most part in that issue. That's for free on the free table back there if there's any more of those issues. Be sure to grab one of those. And if they would run out, you can see that for free online as well on our website. Okay, so we're going to go ahead, though, for the sake of time, and jump to number 11 here on this list. So again, go check those out in that article if you are interested in those first 10, some of which we actually have already kind of covered in this seminar so far. So one prediction that we would make, since God created all of the land creatures on the sixth day of creation, which we talked about, remember, 2 sessions ago, as part of the creation model, And since those days were literal days, as I talked about, then that means humans coexisted with the dinosaurs as opposed to being separated from them by 63 million years, like the secular model would say. So therefore, we would predict that there should be evidence of that coexistence in some form, even though the dinosaurs are extinct now. So in the same way that we would tell others, for example, about something amazing we witnessed, we would expect, for example, that those kind of encounters would be passed down in the form of oral stories, books, and pictures. That's something we would expect. Well, sure enough, ancient dinosaur petroglyphs and carvings that have been dated have been found all over the world that date back to times that before scientists even had been discovering the existence of dinosaurs, even before the term dinosaur had even been coined. So, for example, how would the Anasazi Indians from 700 years ago in Utah have known the anatomy of the Apatosaurus, like what it would have looked like anatomically? Well, interestingly, Apatosaurus fossils were discovered in the area around these petroglyphs a few decades ago and are on display in the Dinosaur Museum there in Blanding, Utah. In the country of Cambodia, wedged between Vietnam and Thailand, there are many temples that were built between 700 and 1300 AD. The Ta Prohm Temple was built in 1186 AD, and there's a bunch of carvings that can be seen on the stone in these structures. And several animals are depicted in a column of carvings, for example, at Ta Prohm, including this carving. Now, what, pray tell, is that supposed to be? You know, it'd be hard for a 4-year-old to miss what's being depicted in this carving. So again, this is precisely what we would expect if humans saw these creatures, which is predicted by the creation model. Now again, this is well before dinosaurs were even discovered. In the Havasupai Canyon of the Grand Canyon, we see ancient petroglyphs as well, and notice the carving in the bottom left of this image right here. The image looks very much like Edmontosaurus. And notice that he's in an upright position, balanced on his tail, indicating that the artist seems to have seen him alive. And again, dinosaur tracks have been found in the surrounding area of that carving. The carving, really, Edmontosaurus is all over out there in the west. Very, very dominant dinosaur out there in the west. In Ica, Peru, we have the discovery of thousands of burial stones from an ancient Indian civilization that lived hundreds of years ago. And so some of the stones portray basic human activity and known human species. We have some of these on display at AP as well. Others depict dinosaurs interacting with humans, anatomically correct dinosaurs, with, for example, dermal frills, which weren't even reported to exist on the sauropods before the early 1990s. They didn't even know about these existing. In Acambaro, Mexico, we have ancient dinosaur figurines that date to 200 AD or before. At the Carlisle Cathedral in the United Kingdom, there are carvings on the tomb of Bishop Richard Bell, who died in 1496, and one that looks astonishingly like a dinosaur. Many other examples could be given. This one's from 200 AD Roman mural. Or this one believed to be all the way back to the period we would say was immediately after the flood. So a depiction of sauropods on an ancient Mesopotamian cylinder seal. Or this petroglyph from northern Arizona, believed to be 800 years old or so. So a host of clear-cut dinosaur-like carvings and figurines, exactly what we would predict if humans and dinosaurs coexisted. They couldn't just take a picture. They drew carvings or made figurines and so forth. So hard for evolutionists to explain if humans never saw these magnificent creatures. Then there are many examples of controversial human artifacts, like this pickaxe encased in stone. We have a replica of this one at AP. These fossilized footprints, which have the distinct appearance, you can tell for yourself. What does that look like to you? What does this look like? And what does this look like? You tell me. I saw a cast of that one when I was out in Arkansas. But these are artifacts that are argued to have been found in Cretaceous sediment out in Texas. So sediment thought by evolutionists had been laid down 65 million years ago. long before humans were supposed to be on the scene. And so in creationist thinking, this would be towards the end of the flood, when the dinosaurs are being finished off and the mammal habitat is being hit next. So the final layers of the sediment are starting to be laid down, so the final land-dwelling life is being wiped out. So skeptics have to do some gymnastics to try to explain anomalies like this, and there are quite a few of them that have been brought up over the years, which, they may or may not be what they seem. They, of course, would argue that they're not. It would be impossible for them. And we'd certainly be able to explain why they would be there if they are what they seem. And we predict that such artifacts would be found if the creation model is true. Besides petroglyphs and figurines, we have stories that have been passed down through the millennia about dinosaurs. Of course, they didn't use that term dinosaur, which hadn't been coined yet. The term dragon was the ancient word, or we would say in English dragon, that would describe these dinosaur-like creatures. Now, of course, embellishments have been made over the years, but if dinosaurs existed with humans at some point in history, we would predict that there would be stories about it, and they're everywhere. Think about it. It's hard to walk into a Chinese or Mexican food restaurant without seeing dragon depictions. We know of tales from American Indians in England with the knights who fought dragons, or Sumerian stories from the 3rd millennium BC depict dragon slaying. The depictions of the dragons from these stories are very much like what we understand dinosaurs to have looked like now. Ancient respected historians give descriptions of dinosaur-like creatures, including the Greek historian Herodotus, Josephus, Marco Polo, and others. Again, this is exactly what we would predict if dinosaurs and humans did in fact coexist. It's also true that the Bible documents historical evidence of the coexistence of humans and what appears to be dinosaur-like creatures in Job 40 and 41. So creatures that coexisted with Job according to Job 40 verse 15. So recall that starting in chapter 38, God starts parading before Job these wonders of his creation, humbling Job with the fact that he's in no position to know what God should or shouldn't do. Job had essentially demanded an explanation from God, thinking that he had been treated unfairly in his suffering. And so God's response was, Job, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know the first thing of what I do, why I do it. Let me show you some of the things that you can understand. So God moves from real-world phenomenon to phenomenon, from real-world creature to creature. Real things, not figurative, unreal creatures, but things that we know actually exist or existed. Humbling Job with evidence that proves that Job is in no position, knowledge-wise, to question God's actions. So God's speech culminates with the final 2 examples of God's awesomeness, the crowning examples of the animal kingdom, what the text calls Behemoth and Leviathan. And Behemoth is described as his strength being in his hips and his power in his muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar, so a big tree. His bones are like beams of bronze, his ribs like bars of iron. He is the first or the chief of the ways of God. Only he who made him can draw near his sword. He lies under the lotus trees and a covert of reeds and marsh. Indeed, the river may rage, yet he is not disturbed. He is confident, though the Jordan gushes into his mouth, though he takes it in his eyes, or one pierces his nose with a snare. And so there's a lot of discourse over the identity of this creature, as well as the next one. No one seems to know for certain what they were. Some say they weren't even real, that they were just figurative creatures that were made up. But that wouldn't make sense in context, since up to this point in his speech, God has been showing real-world examples to Job. It seems that it would defeat the purpose to then make up a creature that doesn't even exist. God is trying to overwhelm Job with the things that he has done in the created order. And further, again, in Job 40 and verse 15, it says that God made Behemoth along with you. Meaning in the same way that God made Job, he made Behemoth. He was a real creature. So scholars mystified by what Behemoth was think really before dinosaurs even were known about, what are you going to do? What are you going to pick to try to match the description here? Well, they picked the elephant or the hippo. And for Leviathan, they picked the crocodile. But the descriptions simply don't match. The elephant doesn't dwell in marshy areas. It needs solid ground. The elephant's strength is not in his hips, verse 16. and rather it's in his head and in his neck. He's weak in the stomach. He's not strong, like the text says. The hippo's tail certainly wouldn't be picked out as a highlighting for its awesomeness or strength, considering that its tail is essentially a little sprig. The text says Behemoth moves his tail like a cedar, and not many animals can be said to have a tail that you would describe as being like a cedar. But guess what we would say had a tail? I mean, if you were to describe what this guy's tail looked like, what would you say? I would probably say a big honking tree, right? So notice also that the text says Behemoth is the first of the ways of God. He's chief in exhibiting the ways of God. I have trouble seeing the hippo as fitting that description, if you keep in mind that there are way more awesome options that are on the scene at this time in history. So the crocodile doesn't match the description of Leviathan either. Commentators want to insert words like, look like all over the place in this narrative. His sneezings flash forth what looks like, they say. The problem is that kind of terminology is used all over the place throughout this text when the author intends to use that, but it's not used in all places. His eyes are like the eyes of the morning, it says. True. But his sneezings flash forth light, plain and simple. No like or as included. Burning lights come out and sparks, not it looks like those things happen. It does happen. Notice smoke comes out, period. But then a figurative description of that smoke is given, as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. See, that part's figurative, but not the smoke part. His breath kindles coals, period. A flame goes out of his mouth, period. His undersides are like sharp potsherds that spread pointed marks in the mire. So this simply doesn't fit the crocodile, whose tracks are smooth, not pointed marks. It's smooth, with a single line down the middle for his tail, not from his belly. So notice the text says, kind of like the comment about Behemoth being first, or the chief of the ways of God. On earth there is nothing like him. He beholds every high thing. Now how in the world would you make a statement like that and apply it to the crocodile? When there are creatures that once existed which fit that description so much more obviously. So in truth, it just wouldn't make sense to select these two creatures to do what God is doing here with Job. They just don't fit the narrative as being the crowning examples of God's power and awesomeness. So think about it. Knowing what we do now about the animal kingdom throughout history, and knowing that the evidence that we've already seen indicates the dinosaurs were around after the flood, at the time of Job, if you, as God, were going to show Job the most humbling examples of the animal kingdom, what would you pick? Well, someone says, how is that possible? I mean, Leviathan breathes fire, how can that happen? We might just as easily say, how is it possible the electric eel can be electric? Okay, he's able to give up the 860-volt shock without hurting himself. Or how about the lightning bug that can emit its own light? Or the bombardier beetle that's able to create its own chemical reaction internally, bringing its chemical to nearly the boiling point of water that it sprays on its predators without hurting itself. Okay, how can it do that? And so we're constantly learning more and more about what is possible in God's creation. Why not the ability to breathe fire if bombardier beetle can direct a chemical explosion at an enemy? Someone says, well, the hippo and the crocodile wouldn't have been known to Job in his day. They were in the relative area, they weren't in that relative area of the earth where Job was, they say. So how would he know what God was talking about? There's no evidence of dinosaurs in that area. There wouldn't be enough vegetation to sustain these big creatures. Well, first of all, there's a lot of assumptions in that argument about the nature of the area where Job lived during this period of time. Right? This is during the Ice Age period. There's a lot of different things going on in what we see today. But it seems to me that the biggest problem with the argument is that it assumes that God was only showing Job things that Job had witnessed in his area of the world. But we know that he wasn't just showing him those things. God had already highlighted several things that Job wouldn't have ever witnessed or even known about until God showed those to him. The laying of the foundation of the earth, the springs of the sea and the recesses of the deep, Job 38:16, he would have known about those. We've only discovered those in the past century or so. The laws of nature and their governance of the earth, chapter 38, verse 33. So God seemed to have been picking out awesome features of the earth, wherever they are, regardless of whether or not Job had seen those. So again, we have to ask, why wouldn't God be showing Job these dinosaurs or dinosaur-like creatures in the case of Leviathan if they were in fact living in Job's day, as the evidence that we've seen indicates? There are evidences of dinosaur-like creatures from all over the world. I really only looked here at a very small sampling to show you. So if this is a neat study to you, then again I would say be sure to check out this book, The Dinosaur Delusion. It's again one of my favorites that we have. It has all the references and responses to quibbles and so forth that are brought up. All right, let's move on to another prediction. Number 12, if the earth is relatively young and humans lived alongside the dinosaurs, then we would predict that there would be evidence that dinosaurs must have been around in the not too distant past. So of course the evidence we already looked at indicates that ancient humans only a few centuries ago had to have apparently seen these guys. They knew what their anatomy was and so forth. But on top of that, in the past decade or so, another type of evidence has been piling up as well. Scientists have been cracking open dinosaur fossils that are supposed to be 65 million years old and discovering collagen in blood vessels with red blood cells still intact. Soft, stretchy, flexible tissue. And I've seen some of the scientists, I've actually been to a presentation where one of these scientists showed the stretchiness of this material under the microscope. And so this is being found in T-Rex, hadrosaurs, mosasaurs, Psittacosaurus fossils, all of which should have long ago decayed if 65 million years is true. So collagen and hemoglobin, it could last undecayed for thousands of years if kept in the right environment, but not millions of years. That's not something we would expect. And they're even finding these dinosaur fossils not in pristine, sterile environments. They're finding them in environments that should have increased the decay. And so there's just no way you would expect 65 million years. And based on this find, it should come as no surprise that C14 is being discovered in dinosaur fossils. Now, if you know much about this dating technique, that's a problem. There should be no detectable C14 left in these fossils if they're millions of years old. C14, after about 100,000 years, you can't detect it anymore. You can't even use C14 detection for anything thought to be 1 million years old. You just can't do it. We don't have the technology to even be able to detect C14 at those levels. So this discovery verifies the prediction by the creation model, totally annihilates the older position of the evolutionary model. They're still scrambling to try to figure out what to do with this latest evidence. Number 13, if the earth is relatively young, then we would predict that geologic processes that have always been assumed to take eons, like petrification, should be able to be found to occur rapidly today. And more scientific evidence is coming to light that verifies that prediction. Scientists have discovered that the rate of petrification can be significantly altered by catastrophic events. So for example, a decade ago, 2004, 5 Japanese scientists published their research on rapid petrification in the secular journal Sedimentary Geology, and they were studying mineral-rich acidic water from the explosion crater of the Tateyama volcano in Japan. And so water runs over the edge of this volcano as a waterfall, and some wood had fallen into the path of this mineral-rich water, and they found that the wood had petrified within 36 years. It was already done. So they decided, okay, we need to do some experiments on this. What's going on? Well, they found that silica petrification could occur at only 7 years. And also in 2004, a paper was published on rapid silicification of plants at Yellowstone. Within 11 months, plants were found to have already had enough silicification that the plant tissues were stabilized against collapse. And the plant structure was replicated, again, within 11 months. So again, the modern science verifies our predictions. What about the origin of coal, oil, and diamonds? They've long been thought to be, take millions of years to form. Scientists now know that's not necessarily the case. Laboratory experiments have verified that coal can form in a matter of minutes, hours, or days, with heat being the primary requirement, which is not a problem in the flood model, as I've already talked about. So volcanic clay accelerates the process with moderate pressure. The 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens verifies the fact that catastrophic activity can rapidly create the environment that is necessary to create coal. The modern flood model, again, would likely brought about the perfect circumstances for producing a lot of coal. And with oil as well, scientists have discovered that it doesn't necessarily take millions of years to form. It can be formed rapidly in labs and in nature. The Guyamas Basin, for example, a trench in the Gulf of California has a 1,500-foot thick layer of material that's been deposited by billions of tiny organisms. And as hot geothermal waters move through this ooze, the material is being converted to oil and natural gas rapidly. Diamonds are thought to be millions of years old, but scientists regularly discover the presence of C14 in diamonds, which again is a problem, telling you that they can't be even 50,000 years old. So C14 should be at completely undetectable levels in anything even thought to be even max again 100,000 years based on the current decay rate of carbon-14. So apparently diamonds aren't as old as scientists have long thought. So something happened within the last few thousand years that sped up their decay rates over a brief period of time, aging them rapidly, and not enough time has since passed to allow for the complete decay of the C14 within those. So diamonds are thousands, not millions of years old. Number 14, again, if the Earth is relatively young, we would predict that evidence will be uncovered that indicates that the layers that you see in the geologic column don't take eons to form. They can form rapidly. And as just one example of that, of evidence that our prediction has been verified, is this idea of polystrate fossils. So these are fossils that cut across multiple poly layers of strata, so polystrate. So like this tree, or this one. So if those layers around those trees take millions of years to form, then a person would have to argue that tree was sticking out of the ground with its roots dead and lithified for eons without decaying before it was finally completely covered with sediment. Well, that'd be impossible. It wouldn't happen. But if the sediments around the tree were deposited rapidly, on the other hand, before there was any chance for decay, then it explains this evidence, and again, it verifies the creation model prediction. And so we found these polystrate fossils all over. Besides trees, you've got calamites and catfish have been uncovered, and this is probably the more famous one, an 80-foot long baleen whale standing on end in a diatomaceous earth quarry in California. So just one example of a polystrate fossil verifies our prediction about the nature of the sediment, the strata, and how quickly they can form. All right, number 15, secular geologists argue that uniformitarianism is true, although there is some movement away from that in the geology textbooks. They're starting to accept some catastrophes, but they're not really very willing to get very far away from uniformitarianism. Evolutionary dating techniques are based on the assumption of uniformitarianism, and those dating techniques are the primary evidence that is really used to try to give any specific dates to the age of the Earth. According to uniformitarianism, processes going on today geologically have always been going on in essentially the same way. So if you see a stream going through a canyon and you see it slowly removing its sediment out of the canyon, then it's assumed it's always done that in the same slow way. If the creation model is true, we predict that canyons can actually form rapidly at times given catastrophic circumstances, and again, evidence substantiates that prediction. So for example, Mount St. Helens, March 19, 1982, there's an eruption at the summit of Mount St. Helens. It caused a massive mud flow, and within one day, a 20-mile long, 140-foot deep canyon was carved, shown here on the screen. So this totally annihilates uniformitarianism and validates what we're saying. If uniformitarianism is true, it should have taken tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years for this little stream to carve that, and yet we know it was done rapidly in one day. It's been called the Little Grand Canyon because it appears to be a 1/40th scale model of the Grand Canyon. Then you've got the Lake Mosquito flood I've talked about briefly, a well-documented flood from the Ice Age. Water breached an ice dam at 500 cubic miles of water. That's 10 times the combined flow of all the rivers in the world were released within 2 days. It destroyed 16,000 square miles of terrain, cut hundreds of feet through solid rock, created canyons, carved 50 cubic miles of earth. All right, number 16, if the Earth is relatively young, but evolutionary dating techniques say that it's old, then we would predict that evidence would come forward indicating that evolutionary dating techniques must have some flawed assumptions. And that evidence is becoming more and more readily available. Evolutionary dating techniques are built upon at least 3 fundamental assumptions that have major problems. Each of these can be shown to be unreasonable. I talk about this more in my evolution seminar. And we've got a book back there called The Young Earth that's put out by the Institute for Creation Research, where it provides a lot of scientific evidence going through each of these to show that they're terrible assumptions. For the sake of time, let's look briefly at some recent news which highlights why this first assumption is wrong. The first assumption is, okay, so you've got, in these radioactive elements, you've got, for example, a rock that may be composed of 2 different elements. One element is breaking down into the other element over time. The first element is called the parent element, and as it decays, it turns into what's called the daughter element. So it's the parent to daughter. And so as that happens, they make the assumption, well, that rate of decay from parent to daughter has been constant throughout history. So they make the assumption it's a constant decay rate, it's never changed. And they've tested it under so many different settings that they've always felt very confident with that assumption. Now we would say it could rapidly speed up under the correct circumstances, which we would say were present during the flood. And so sure enough, we're now finding out that they're wrong about this idea that these decay rates are necessarily constant. In 2009, CERN, this is the group that has the Large Hadron Collider that discovered the Higgs boson particle, the God particle from a couple years back. They announced research in 2009 that indicates that the nuclear decay rates are not, in fact, always constant like they had thought. So they found out that the decay rate of thorium-228 in water, notice in water, sound like the flood, increased by a factor of 10,000 as a result of ultrasonic cavitation, again, which is exactly what we would expect in the flood model. And then the following year, 2010, Purdue released some research where they discovered that radioactive decay rates, in fact, vary with the sun's rotation. And so this is only 2 things from recently. I mean, as more time progresses, who knows what all they'll find about how much these decay rates can change under certain circumstances. So without this fundamental assumption about constant nuclear decay rates in place, the radiometric dating techniques are worthless. They can't prove anything about an old age. And that is the primary evidence of an old Earth that they are using. So again, the creation model predicted that decay rates are not constant, and science is confirming that. Number 17, if the Bible indicates that the earth is relatively young, then the creation model would predict that evidence of that claim should surface. And it has. Many different lines of evidence point to a young earth. Let's look at a few of those. We look at the moon's recession. Okay, so the moon is receding from the earth. It's moving away from the earth at a rate of about 4 centimeters per year at present. The recession isn't a linear recession. So when it was closer to the earth, the recession would have been faster. And so it's slowing down. So based on the equation that describes that recession rate, scientists can calculate where the moon would have been compared to the earth at different times. So we know, for example, that 6,000 years ago, the moon would have been about 800 feet closer to the earth than it is now. And that's not a problem, okay, no problem, but not if the moon is as old as they say it is, the secular guys. So evolutionists claim that the moon is 4.5 billion years old. Okay, so let's consider that. Only 1.5 billion years ago, the moon would have been actually touching the earth. So it would be physically impossible for it to be any older than that. So they would have to try to explain this by claiming that the recession rate must have been different in the past. But notice that would give up on their uniformitarian assumption. But the uniformitarian assumption, again, is what they use to give them the old ages that they need for their naturalistic model. So without those in place, then their proclaimed evidence for an old age of the earth vanishes. So bottom line, the moon can't be as old as the evolutionists claim, but a 6,000 to 8,000 year old moon, as predicted by the creation model, fits comfortably with the evidence, no problem. All right, another example in the area of population statistics. Evolutionists believe humans have been on the earth, at least the Homo genus has been around for some 2 to 3 million years. So using statistical equations, we can get an estimate of how many people should be on the earth if that were true. Again, given conservative estimates accounting for disease, war, famine, and so forth, and also assuming that humans have only been on the earth for 1 million rather than 2 to 3 million years, okay, just assume 1 million, there should be 10 to the 2,000 people on the earth today. Now, if you know anything about math, you know that is a big number, right? So 10 to the third power would be what? What? Huh? 10 to the third power is what? Yeah. Just 1,000, right? So 10 squared is 100. 10 to the third is 1,000. What's 10 to the fourth? All right, so when you get 10 to the sixth, where are we at? We're at a million, right? So 10 to the ninth, a billion. 10 to the 12th. So are you seeing how huge this is getting quick? Now try to jump to 10 to the 2,000th power. That's a lot. That's a lot of people, right? That's how many, based on these statistical equations, there should be. To try to grasp that, consider that the known universe is 28 billion light years in diameter. So if you took little miniature humans, 3 foot tall, with narrow shoulders, and squeezed them like sardines into the universe, you could squeeze 10 to the 82nd power people into the whole universe. That's it. Now notice that leaves quite a few humans left, doesn't it? In fact, a ridiculous number of humans, enough to completely pack 10 to the 1,918 other universes like ours. So just completely fill up that many more universes. Now remember, this is calculations based on humans being around for 1 million years, not 2 to 3 million years. Okay, so they said, well, that just couldn't be. There could be that many people. There just wouldn't be enough resources on the earth. And so all those extra people would just die off around 50 billion, because they think that's what the earth's capacity is. Well, okay, if that's the case, then there should be evidence that that capacity was reached, which means there should be billions upon billions of hominid fossils that prove that. But that's not what we find. I mean, we're scraping the bottom of the barrel to find a toe bone and a tooth. Right? That's what we get when we're digging. It's just not reasonable, the mathematical gymnastics that have to be done to try to make this work. Now, if we adjust our calculations based on the creation model prediction, and we say that, okay, if creation is true, we'd argue that about 4,300 years ago, 6 people began the repopulation of the earth, not taking into account Noah and his wives, we're just looking at these kids. There should be 6.7 billion people on the planet today, which of course, you know, is very close to what we actually see. Another example, scientists have been measuring the Earth's magnetic field with precision since 1835, and so they've determined that the Earth's magnetic field is decaying, and it has a half-life of 1,400 years. So if we assume uniformitarianism, as they do, and we calculate back in time using their model, and we double the Earth's magnetic field intensity every 1,400 years, you get to a point 100,000 years ago, if you kept going that far, where the field would have been so strong that the Earth's field would have been comparable to that of a neutron star. So we're talking immense heat that would have been catastrophic to the Earth. Earth's internal structure likely couldn't have even sustained that. It would be impossible for life to exist 100,000 years ago. And yet, evolutionists would say that life has been around, not 100,000, but 3.8 billion years. So we got a problem. Again, we got a problem. If the Earth is as young as we say it is, again, there's no problem to dodge with this. Another example, scientists know that helium is accumulating in the Earth's atmosphere, and they know how much helium is there. And they know the rate at which helium is accumulating in the atmosphere. So again, we use their assumptions. It's easy to calculate the upper limit for how old the atmosphere could be. It could not be any older than 2 million years. That's the upper limit. That doesn't give the actual age of the atmosphere. That's just the upper limit. Now this is a limit so far under what the evolutionists need it to be. Using their own uniformitarian assumptions, the Earth cannot be as old as they proclaim. So the creation model would predict a young atmosphere, and the helium content of the atmosphere verifies that prediction. So there's a bunch of scientific techniques like this, which of course they'll talk about in the school system. They're available that verify our predictions for the young age of the Earth. For the sake of time, let's go ahead and move forward. Number 18, evolution predicts that life has evolved into more complex forms, and intelligence has gradually increased over time, starting with the single-celled organism and ending with the state of consciousness that humans enjoy. So ancient man is depicted as being a dumb caveman, grunting and beating things with clubs. He's incapable of intelligent thought, and he only develops more sophisticated technology as his brain evolves enough to allow him to. Now, the creation model would actually predict kind of the opposite, right? The creation model would say, God made man fully formed and perfect mentally. His brain and his genes were in pristine condition, without genetic defect and mutation. So his ability to think and reason could have exceeded our own. And so man, before the flood, could have been capable of amazing feats when you take into account how long they were living. So the Bible verifies that humans were already intelligent at the beginning, indicating that cities were being built by the time of Adam's grandson. Apparently, during the lifetime of Adam, men had already begun using tents and having livestock and playing musical instruments and even working with bronze and iron. So we're bringing out metal already. So practice is thought to have taken hundreds of thousands of years for humans to develop. So the evolutionary model would predict this continual increase in human advancement in intelligence and enlightenment as humans evolve. But the creation model would predict that advancement doesn't really have to do with intelligence as much as it does the state of a society. So the decisions that its leaders make, for example, whether the society creates an atmosphere that encourages learning and research and exploration, how free a society is to exercise its God-given talents, and of course whether or not that society is behaving in a way that grants it providential blessings from God. We would consider those things important. So advancement in a society would be ups and down at different levels throughout history in a society. And when a society would collapse because they became so wicked, we would expect that a lot of that advancement would just come to a halt, many times disappear, nobody even know about it anymore, it's just gone. And the Bible describes that, where God would just wipe out civilizations, people won't even know about it anymore, it's over, it's over. So sure enough, the more archaeologists are digging around, the more amazing things are discovered that prove the great intelligence of ancient man. They found amazing architecture, structures that many times are still a mystery as to how the ancients were able to create these. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of advanced ancient human intelligence from all over the world. Ancient boats able to hold many people, precise maps, advanced astronomy, even though they didn't even have the tools we have. Chemistry, hydraulic engineering, weaponry. Solid evidence indicates that the Nazca people of Peru, who were flourishing between 100 BC and AD 800, they were able to perform successful skull surgery already and to relieve pressure on the brain from battle wounds. They also were able to build a sophisticated system of aqueducts, many of which are still functioning today, called puquios. Ancient towers, ziggurats, pyramids have been found all over the world. Abilities which societies had, and then the technology often disappeared with the collapse of that society. And so the societies even that exist today wouldn't be able to replicate what was done. I don't even know how they did it. Only to be then uncovered by archaeologists hundreds or thousands of years later. The Nazcan people, again flourishing some 2,000 years ago, were able to even draw these enormous, precise pictures like these on the screen. They drew these on the ground, pictures which are so enormous that many of them weren't even discovered until we could fly over. So you'll notice these are roads. These tiny little lines are roads that are all over the place here. So these are enormous pictures that they were able to draw with precision. Now, there's a lot of theory about what that was used for, what that was about. But the interesting thing is that they had those abilities. In the 1930s, archaeologists discovered ancient batteries, proving that people in Baghdad knew how to make batteries as early as 250 BC. In 2006, the New York Times ran a piece announcing the discovery of ancient Peruvian canals that were used for irrigation farming. They're thought to be 4,000 to 5,000 years old. So we're talking all the way back to Abraham and beyond. Craig Morris of the American Museum of Natural History, he said their use of slope and management of water flows shows again that ancient people were a lot smarter and more observant than we often give them credit for. So humans have always been intelligent. And again, the creation model would predict that would have always been the case, even in ancient times. Just this morning, I was over there at that Russell cave. They've got, again, if you haven't been over there, they've got some, of course, they're dating these humans as being 10,000 years old, 10,000 years ago. When I'm looking at the engineering, some of the stuff they were doing, I mean, I don't know that I would come up with what, I mean, I've got a PhD in mechanical engineering, and yet the sophisticated drill that they came up with, since they don't have batteries and electricity to do what we do, it was amazing. I went ahead and took a video of this guy demonstrating this drill that they had the ability, that they of course claim goes back 10,000 years. We would say this is just humans right after the ark. They don't have a lot of tools to be able to use, but they obviously are still brilliant. So I picture myself, okay, what would I do if we lost gas and electricity tomorrow? Okay, how am I going to drill something? Well, all of a sudden, you're going to think that we're primitive. And really the issue is we've just lost some of our technological ability, and it has nothing to do with our intelligence. We're going to be able to figure out how to do things because we're intelligent as humans. We're going to be able to do that. And that's what you see. Humans have always been intelligent like this. That does not fit the evolutionary model. And in fact, the further back, the more amazing we are, how sophisticated humans were able to think of things. Now, it's true, of course, that we do have a lot of advanced technology today, but technology does not necessarily mean higher intelligence, as though we've gotten smarter. So when you really think about this, the primary discoveries that have caused the technological impact and progress that we've had today, you think electricity, maybe telephone, the internal combustion engine, you think of airplanes and computers. A lot of these can be ultimately traced back in general to just individuals who either accidentally stumbled across a discovery or designed something after many trial and errors and still ultimately stumbled across it. It wasn't about humans being more evolved and sophisticated. Then after we discover something, now humans are good at taking a discovery and building on it and inventing things. And we have more people on the planet today and more communication between countries than the past that allows progress to go rapidly. But the primary discoveries themselves that spark the technological rise are often just lucky breaks. Or as we would see it, providential blessings. And we've seen a lot of them in this country. So if the pre-flood world had stumbled across electricity, who knows what they would have been able to do? I often think about that. Who knows what they even were capable of doing? All of that was totally wiped out. It's hard to even know what they were even able to do. Especially when you take into account how long they lived. All right, number 19, since the Bible mentions giant humans, we predict that there is a surface that supports that claim. And so are giants a mythical idea? Apparently not, at least according to the evolutionists themselves. They don't think so. The popular science podcast called The Naked Scientist is put out by Cambridge University. They conducted an interview with Lee Berger in 2007. Lee Berger is the paleoanthropologist of the University of Witwatersrand, South Africa, and he's been in the news a lot lately. He's the one that discovered the Australopithecus sediba fossils and Homo naledi. So really the two biggest fossil discoveries of the last 5 years has been him. So the group had an opportunity to go visit his fossil collection at his university where he's a professor. And so they discussed the fossils at his museum. So in the article following that interview, Chris Smith, who's the editor, he said one of the most interesting things that the fossil record reveals is that we went through a period of extreme giantism. These were people routinely over 7 feet tall. They were huge. Okay, so Berger says, you probably heard the myth that ancient humans were tiny, and some of them were tiny. But as we move through the period of 0.5 million to 300,000 years ago in Africa, they go through a period of giantism. So he then proceeds to show the group an example of one of the giant femurs from a species dubbed Homo heidelbergensis. So Berger says, they're huge. That's so big, we can't even calculate how big this individual was. You'd need an NBA basketball player to get someone of the height someone like this would have been, something like over 7 feet tall. So these are enormous fossils. They really can't even tell how large the person would have to be that had these bones. He just surmises over 7 feet tall. Now Smith responds to Berger and asks him if that extreme size could just be an abnormality. And so Berger says, no, because we found a lot of them. Everywhere we find them enormous. These are what we call archaic Homo sapiens. So notice, they're just humans. They're just old humans. And and he's calling them Homo heidelbergensis. The other distinguishing characteristic is that they're huge. So whenever you ever hear Homo heidelbergensis, you'll see it in the textbook, we're just talking about old humans that are huge. That's what that means. Some people refer to them as Homo heidelbergensis. These individuals are extraordinary. They are giants. So notice, again, he acknowledges these are humans, but they're just too big to be human. You know, that's what the issue is. So if Homo heidelbergensis isn't big enough for you, back in 1944, R. von Koenigswald of the Netherlands Indies Geological Survey, he found some enormous jawbones. Time magazine ran an article announcing the discovery. Notice the title of this article, Giants in Those Days, quoting from Genesis 6 and verse 4. He said, Koenigswald first found a big jawbone which looked more human than Pithecanthropus's, but was so massive that he thought it could not possibly be a man's. Then he found a still larger jaw, the biggest ever discovered, which was unmistakably human. It was apparently the most primitive, truly human fossil ever discovered. Koenigswald named it Meganthropus paleogevonicus. And if Homo heidelbergensis isn't enough, wow. And that wasn't the end. Koenigswald's crowning find dwarfed even Meganthropus. He found 3 astounding teeth. They were 6 times as big as a modern man's molars. Weidenreich is sure from the pattern of their biting surfaces that they are definitely human. Weidenreich was Manhattan's American Museum of Natural History at that time. So evidence of enormous humans. Now it's possible that these aren't all references to the race of giants that we read about in the Bible, like Goliath. I would hypothesize that the ancient world, especially that pre-flood environment, might have been more conducive to a larger size all around. So not just to the animals and plants, but humans in a more widespread way, as Weidenreich is suggesting. Maybe not, but notice again we have scientific evidence that verifies the Bible's prediction that humans can be enormous, and it substantiates the creation model in there. By the way, he named this monster Gigantanthropus. Weidenreich now believes that giantism and massiveness may have been a general or at least widespread character of early mankind. And if the fossil evidence isn't enough, we look around today and see examples of extremely large people, can't we? Even though we're thousands of years beyond the optimal period of human health and longevity. The professional wrestler Andre the Giant died in 1993. He was 7 feet 4 inches, and he was short compared to the tallest man alive today, Sultan Kosin, who's 8 feet 1 inch tall. His immense height seems to have been as a result of a pituitary condition, which resulted in overproduction of growth hormone in his case. According to Guinness Book of World Records, the tallest man in medical history that has been reliably confirmed was Robert Vodlow, who died in 1940, measuring in at 8 feet 11 inches, so just shy of 9 feet tall, weighed 491 pounds at one point. So the giants of the Bible were not mythical beings. This is a very real possibility for humans to be this large. They're real humans, even though they are enormous humans. All right, number 20, if the flood happened, we predict that stories from such a cataclysmic event would be preserved as ancient oral traditions or in writings. Since the flood would have been before the time when apparently writing was even occurring, the stories would have initially been passed down by word of mouth. And so we would expect similarities between stories, but we would expect them to not be exactly the same. There would likely be distortions that have been made over the millennia. Well, sure enough, there's over 250 legends about a great flood. And here's just a few of those. In Greece, Zeus wanted to destroy humans with a flood and start over. Deucalion and his wife are put in a large wooden chest, and then a flood came that covered almost all the mountain peaks. In Babylon, Utnapishtim is warned by a god to build a boat in preparation for a terrible flood. He covered it with pitch, brought animals of all kinds of provisions, sent out a dove to see if the flood had receded, then a swallow, then a raven, which didn't return. They left the boat and worshipped their gods. The Toltec Indians, a great flood destroyed the first world 1,716 years after creation. Very specific and very close to what we would say. A few people escaped in a closed chest. Whenever I was in Grand Canyon, I heard about the Anasazi Indians having also their own flood legend. In China, you have the Nasu. God sent messengers to tell 3 sons of a flood. Dumb listened, ironically, and built a wooden boat. And then a huge flood came that covered the whole earth. Dumb was saved and had 3 sons that repopulated the earth. So amazing similarities that they don't match the Bible model perfectly, but if they did match, then you would expect there probably had been some kind of collusion. In the books, The Discovery of Genesis and Genesis and the Mystery Confucius Couldn't Solve, Nelson even argues that the origin of the Chinese word for boat is comprised of the ancient forms of the words for vessel, ate, and mouth for people, vessel-laden people. And he makes a case for several other Chinese words being traced back to the flood, to the Tower of Babel, and even to creation. He also argues from historical evidence that the Chinese were originally monotheistic. For the sake of time, we'll skip to number 22. So evidence that catastrophism, rapid burial, explains much of the geologic column, especially the fossils. We would predict that would be the case, that kind of evidence would come forward. Well, we've already seen examples of polystrate fossils, but then you also have these dinosaur graveyards that are found all over the world. These are some dinosaur graveyards that I was excavating with Art Chadwick last year up in Wyoming. There's about over 18,000 dinosaur fossils that have been dug up so far in this land. And so we're talking enormous graveyards which prove catastrophic activity. There's solid evidence of catastrophic burial of these creatures. And then you've got many fossils showing evidence of rapid burial, catastrophism, as would be predicted if the flood happens. And notice this fish is in the middle of eating his dinner. This ichthyosaur is in the middle of giving birth whenever it gets buried. These dinosaur fossils show a very typical posture that dinosaur fossils are found in, a death pose. They're often found in sediments deposited by water. Their heads are thrown back, their tails are curved forward, and sometimes with their mouths open as though they're drowning. And they call this posture the epistotonic death posture. It is understood to be caused by death due to water. And this is typical for the dinosaurs. This is a picture of a fossilized clam bed I found in Wyoming in 2014 while studying the flood sediment up there in Wyoming. So these clams are fossilized, many of them in a closed position, indicating catastrophic burial. Clams are known to open when they die in just a natural setting, and yet these, by and large, were closed, indicating catastrophic. All right, numbers 23 through 26. So lots of things that we would expect about the fossil record based on our predictions. It should reveal fully functional, distinct creatures when they first appear, without any evolutionary history. You would expect at the bottom of the fossil record not to be necessarily more simple creatures, but perhaps, first of all, creatures that were closest to where they would get hit and buried by the flood first as the ocean is coming up. And secondly, they would tend to be smaller and less maneuverable, so they couldn't escape from the flood, but not necessarily less complex, but they're going to be found the lowest, with exceptions to that. And we would predict fossil anomalies to the evolutionary thinking, since again, this isn't about simple to complex. It's going to be about other things. So, looking at this first prediction, this has been verified beyond doubt in the fossil record. The idea that when the fossils first show up, they're fully formed without any evolutionary history. And it's even conceded by the secular community. When you look at the geologic column starting at the bottom and move up, so you move back further in history and then you start coming to nearer in history as you go up. You're going along and you don't see many fossils at all throughout the pre-Cambrian strata. And then all of a sudden, boom, you've got this explosion of life. So these creatures that are fully formed with no evolutionary history, and it's called the Cambrian explosion. Fully functional species in the geologic column that just show up, and they've got difficulty dealing with it. Think of what Richard Dawkins said. The Cambrian strata rocks, vintage about 600 billion years, are the oldest in which we find most of the major vertebrate groups, and we find many of them already in an advanced state of evolution, the very first time they appeared. It's as though they were just planted there without any evolutionary history. Needless to say, this appearance of sudden planting has delighted creationists. Well, why do you think that would be? Because we would predict it and it verifies it. It verifies our predictions. Not good news for the evolutionists, but it's perfectly in harmony with the creation model. Atheistic evolutionist Blair Scott, the director of American Atheists Incorporated, he said in his debate with Kyle concerning the Earth, if I take the Cambrian explosion on its own, the logical conclusion I would draw is, wow, it was created. All right? It's a big admission. Okay, but then he goes on to say, the problem is there's all this other evidence around it. You know, you creationists, you ignore this stuff. And I'm like, wait a minute here. Every evidence I've ever heard brought up, we address. Okay, so after we address all of that evidence and show that that doesn't cut it, what are you left with? Wow, it was created. So thank you, Mr. Scott, for telling us that. Appreciate that. All right, numbers 24 and 25 on that I read. So evolutionary theory would predict that fossils in the lowest strata should be simple, closer to that single-celled organism that everything supposedly came from. Now, trilobites are considered representative of that Cambrian strata right there at the beginning. And then as you move higher in the column, the fossils should become more complex as life evolves towards human beings. And in the Bill Nye and the Nyhan debate again, Bill Nye even argued that you never see the higher, more complex organisms mixing with the lower organisms. And if you did, you could change the world, he said. You could disprove evolution, which is just ironic, because the truth is even the trilobite isn't a lower animal. It's not simple, as evolutionary theory would predict. It's considered one of the very first creatures to evolve because it shows up down there first. And therefore you'd have predicted it to be extremely simple, but it's not. It's extremely complex. The eye of the trilobite is equipped with aplanatic lenses, so dual lenses, as opposed to the human eye, which is equipped with a single refractive lens. So scientists acknowledge that the design of the trilobite's eye is better than any other eye design, and yet again, the trilobite is supposed to be primitive and simple. And yet this is prime evidence against evolutionary theory. But even if we acknowledge the trilobites were primitive, it's still not also true that you don't see what they consider higher and lower animals mixing. There's several examples of anomalies, artifacts that have been found that shouldn't be where they were found if evolution is right. And they're very controversial, to say the least. And many would brush these examples aside as not being what they seem. And just as one example, consider the Meister footprint, which what appears to be a fossilized sandal print with a trilobite in it. Now it's disputed by some that, this isn't what it seems, that's not a sandal footprint, can be, but it is exactly what we would predict to be the case if the creation model is true. We find human-like footprints in coal veins that are supposed to have been laid down 248 million years before humans were around, or that human pickaxe found in ancient sediment that I showed you earlier. How about the fossil of a mammal with a dinosaur in its stomach that we found? Mammals like this weren't supposed to be around with the dinosaurs, and yet we're eating the dinosaurs, right? Or the existence of so-called living fossils like the coelacanth, creatures that were thought to be ancient, extinct creatures lower in the fossil record that would never have mixed with the complex creatures like humans, and yet we find them alive today. So this proves that just because you don't see fossils or certain creatures in the record in a given layer doesn't mean that creature didn't exist at that time. So the evolutionary model struggles with anomalies like that contradict the predictions of evolution, but they're actually predicted by the creation model. We would argue that just because something is lower in the column, it doesn't necessarily mean it's more primitive or simple. Since all kinds were created fully functional and perfect in the beginning, you would expect a diversity of simplicity and complexity everywhere from the beginning. So whether or not a fossil is lower or higher is going to be due to other factors. It could have to do with when the flood buried that habitat where that creature was. By and large, that is what we see when we look at the geologic column. It has to do with when an ecological unit was wiped out by the flood as the flood is coming further and further inland. But it could also have to do with an organism's ability to burrow lower and thus already be lower in the column. It could have to do with the floodwaters carrying stuff, pushing them up or down in the column, maybe bringing ocean stuff up higher in the column as it's bringing it onto land and then being covered and fossilized with mud flows. It could have to do with the ability of a creature to maneuver away from mudslides and so forth. So smaller organisms are going to be more likely to get caught because they're slower, but you might expect some of the larger creatures that can move quickly, maybe even the more intelligent animals, to be able to escape fossil forming phenomena, and therefore not have been as likely to be found lower in the column. So but we would expect there to be some anomalies to that, exceptions to the rule. The evolutionists can't explain those exceptions very well, because when you look higher and lower in the column, you're talking about millions of years. We're talking about, this is all within a year that this is going on. And so the anomalies would be if one creature happens to be somewhere that his buddies aren't, and he gets caught out of place compared to his buddy. That's something we might expect to happen. But the evolutionists are going to have a problem with that. Fossil graveyards are clear examples of places where herds of animals were caught and unable to escape a cataclysmic fossil forming event. All right, number 27. Sedimentary rock is understood by geologists to usually be formed within bodies of water. So if a flood occurred, we would expect that sedimentary rocks should be found prevalently on the earth, and they are. They are the most common rocks exposed at the surface of the earth. They make up 75% of the surface rocks. You even find them up on the mountains. Number 28, seismites are likely going to be found in the flood, and specifically if CPT is true, which again I talked about in the last session. Now, seismites are these layers of sediment that are known to form during earthquakes when the sediment is saturated with water, when it's underwater. And so, whenever you have CPT going on and you have plates smashing into each other and stuff, and you have all this wet sediment, you're going to expect seismites to form all over the place. And so that is exactly what we find. This is one of the big things we were studying in Wyoming this summer, and 2 summers ago. We were studying these enormous seismites. Now usually when they find seismites in modern times, whenever you've got a 9.0 Richter scale earthquake, it might form a seismite this big. Now look at these seismites. These are what I might call big mama. Big mama seismites, right? We're not talking inches, we're talking feet, meters. So this is proof of enormous amounts of water. So Wyoming being totally underwater, and then proof of unheard of earthquakes. I mean, you can't even get a scale of these. So we're talking mountains forming rapidly. We're talking plates smashing into each other and sending seismites across the entire continent. That's what we're talking about here. So this is exactly what we would predict if we're right. And this is probably, these are probably formed maybe when the Rockies are being formed out there. And then our last 2 here, if the creation model is true and the incident at the Tower of Babel is true, then we would expect there to be evidence that event happened through, again, maybe stories that are passed down through the millennia, like with the flood and the existence of dinosaurs. And we'd also expect there to not be any conclusive evidence of civilizations whose history reaches back before the flood, since all civilizations were wiped out at the flood. And I'll talk about that one more tomorrow. But concerning this number 29 here, so recall the flood legend of the Toltec Indians. In that legend, after the survivors left this chest that survived the flood, they wandered the earth until they found a place to build a zaquali, a high tower, in case another flood came. And so during that time period, their languages were confused and they spread out over the earth. The Miao Tzu in China, so again, they have their legend about the flood. It poured 40 days, and then there was 55 days of drizzle. It covered the mountain ranges, and then Noah and his family and the animals were saved in a wide boat, and a bird was sent out, and there were sacrifices. And then notice afterwards, the survivors made cities, spoke the same language, built a very high tower, which was wrong. God mixed the language and didn't finish the city or tower, and then they separated over the earth. So Don Landis documents other examples. In the Burmese legend, the people built a pagoda to reach the heavens. And their god came down angrily and confused their languages and caused them to spread out. In the Congo, instead of building a tower, the people balanced themselves on tall poles. And in the Mexican version, they built a tower out of clay. In India, it was demons, and they built an altar to the sky and were thwarted by the sky god. In Africa, Greece, the Assam people, they've all got legends. And many have a story about a structure being built into the sky, the languages being confused so that the people were spread out. And as with the flood legends, the details, of course, don't match, and they wouldn't expect it to be, since the traditions were passed down orally for centuries. And if they did match, you would expect there's been some kind of collusion. But the common thread of an ancient incident involving God, a tall structure, the confusion of languages, this is a common theme that would be predicted based on the flood model. Now, as a side note, we might also make the prediction about the languages of the earth. If evolution is true, just like with the origin of species, you would predict one language as a starting point, relation, as they say, through descent from a common ancestor. If Babel happened and God created new languages to cause humanity to spread out as he commanded, then we would expect that there would be evidence that today's languages could be grouped into families of languages that can be traced back to ancient originals. I'm not sneeze. Take it left. So proto-languages. And so it had no evidence of evolving from each other. And there is, in fact, evidence of that prediction. A language can be extremely difficult to sort out. And there's apparently no consensus on the matter between linguists, but there is evidence that the thousands of spoken languages today can be traced back to possibly fewer than 20 languages, probably coinciding with the genealogies of Genesis 11, maybe, which seem to be laying out how the family clans spread out to fill the earth after Babel. Another interesting prediction as a bonus, Bill Cooper, in his book, After the Flood, traces down the ancient genealogies of various cultures, like the Greeks and Romans, whose genealogies apparently can be traced all the way back to Japheth, with Jupiter being another name for Japheth. The Romans apparently deified Japheth and called him the son of heaven and earth. In Roman mythology, Jupiter is the Roman equivalent of Zeus in Greek mythology. And notice that one of the sources that has this genealogy, Nennius 18, also has Javan and Elisha, the son and grandson of Japheth, in the biblical text. And so Cooper notes that in India, the Vedas mention Japheth as well, calling him Prajapati. So again, notice that similarity. Keep in mind that, again, genealogies would have been primarily oral for centuries. And they had deified Japheth as well, calling him the Lord of creation. He also illustrates the genealogies of the Miao-Tzu people of China, so genealogies that were already intact before Christian missionaries appeared in China. And again, the similarities with the biblical text are stunning. In the place of Adam is the Miao-Tzu word for dirt, coinciding with where Adam came from, I guess. And then notice the similarities. Dirt's son is Sethi, and notice the comparison with Seth. And the others don't match up clearly until right before Noah, when you have Lama corresponding to Lamech, Nuah corresponding to Noah. The sons of Nuah are Lohan for Ham, Loshin for Shem, and Japhu for Japheth. The sons of Loshin and Elan and Negashur corresponding to Elam and Asher. The sons of Lohan are Kusa and Meseh corresponding to Cush and Mizraim. And then Japhu has Gomer corresponding to Gomer in the Bible. So these similarities seem too great to just pass off as coincidence. And again, such similarity would be predicted if we're right, if the creation model is true. So, we can't make any predictions. Bill Nye's right about that. We got nothing. We're not an unscientific bunch of blind faith people. That's what we are. So, we're sorry. You're right, Bill Nye. You're right. We can't make predictions. Can't do it. Sorry. All right, moving on. All right, so talking briefly here about our media options that are back there. I want to tell you about those real quick. This DVD here is, I told you that Christian evidences, you have the pillars, the three big pillars of Christian evidences are existence of God, inspiration of the Bible, and deity of Christ. And so there's DVDs addressing each of those. So this first one here is on the existence of God and about evolution. This second one is on the deity of Christ and the historicity of Christ. And then we have a DVD on the inspiration of the Bible. So that is kind of the pillars of Christian evidence is right there. Then we've got this DVD, which is a seminar Dr. Mike Counts does. If you don't know who he is, he does some auxiliary writing for us at AP. He works at NASA. He's an MIT nuclear engineer. And he was actually an atheist and studied his way out of that in college, and now has a great seminar on this topic. Evolution is religion, not science. And then I told you about that teen book that I really enjoy, Always Be Ready, where Kyle, for teens, responds to the biggest arguments that are being levied against God, the God of the Bible, slavery and all that stuff. This is like a little seminar type thing that goes with that. So a good kind of thing for Bible classes and so forth to go through those topics. This is my dad's seminar dealing with Islam, teaching you what is Islam about, who is Muhammad, and how can you know that the Quran is not inspired. You can imagine this is becoming a pretty important thing to have now, isn't it? This is growing in our country. This is a problem. So we need to know what we're dealing with. Okay, and then he's got this series, The Silencing of God, where he goes through and just shows stunning evidence for what the founders of this country really believed with regard to Christianity. And this is the sequel to that. Both of those would be great things to go through before this upcoming debate, or not debate, but upcoming election. These would be good things to go through. Then we've got this series that Eric did. I told you Eric Lyons is the one that does a lot of our alleged discrepancies, responding to all the charges that the Bible contradicts itself. And so this is a series that he did, going through a lot of the main ones that people bring up and giving the basic principles for how you should deal with those whenever they come up and where you can figure them out on your own. And so a neat little series. He actually recorded it with some of the teens that he was working for at Wetumpka. So it works for teens all the way up through adults. Good stuff. And then we've got the 3 debates that Kyle has been involved in. He's the one that's put in most of the time on our debating stuff. And so he generally is going around dealing with the existence of God and talking to atheists about that. This one with Dan Barker, which I think I heard you guys might have gone through. Did I understand that right? And then this one with Blair Scott wasn't real good because Kyle this guy did not come prepared to play. And Kyle just destroyed him. Kyle smoked all of them, but this guy, it was sad. But this one, he deals with Bart Ehrman, who's, a really well-known New York Times best-selling author type guy, who was actually studied under Bruce Metzger, who is one of the more conservative Greek scholars that we all quote from in the Brotherhood. And he actually studied under him, and yet he came out of it thinking the Bible hasn't been transmitted faithfully and so forth. And that's what he goes around and tries to do. He actually teaches, I think, Bible theology at the University of North Carolina or something. Anyway, this debate with Kyle was specifically on pain, suffering, and the existence of the God of the Bible. This is a DVD, just, I forget if it's just kind of like an hour long, but it's dealing with that specific question. What about the separation of church and state? Did the American founders really believe in what that has become to be known as today? And where should the Christians stand on this subject? This is an important topic. So this is one of the big arguments that people make today is, we don't have the original autographed copies of the books of the Bible. We don't have Paul's signature, on any of the manuscripts we have. We have copies of copies. How do we know the Bible has been transmitted faithfully from then to now? How can we know that? Now, a lot of people the skeptics are coming out saying, including Bart Ehrman, are coming out saying, it hasn't been transmitted faithfully. You only have the Bible. And so you're expecting everybody to submit to this book whenever it's been corrupted over time and humans have put in a bunch of stuff to control people, all this garbage. So this is a very fundamental topic. We got to be able to know how confident are we that the Bible's been transmitted faithfully, and are we ready to be able to explain that kind of information to people? So good stuff, several sessions in that. This is a new one that he put out on the question of the changes that are going on in churches of Christ with regard to worship. As people are moving away from the biblical pattern and various things are being added, changes are being made. This is looking at those from the angle of, is this stuff authorized? Is this acceptable to God? And then this is the seminar that I told you about, that is kind of the opposite of what we're doing this weekend. This is more dismantling the evolutionary side of things. That was the point of that DVD. All right? I told you, oh, this is an audio, those of you that don't have time to read, or can't read, I guess. We've got audiobooks for some of these things. This is, I told you, our flagship book on Christian evidences, and this is that Sovereignty of God that I showed you on the last page. Again, these are read by a member of the church that's a professional at this, the audiobooks there. And I told you about that we have a Christian evidences show for kids, and I think we have, 10 volumes of that. Each volume has 2 episodes. We've got, I think, 2 more volumes we're going to do, and then that'll be it for that show. And then I told you all about these memory work CDs to help you remember verses and so forth that are useful in evangelistic type of settings. All right. So tomorrow morning, we're going to answer the question, is the creation model scientifically defensible? So I'm specifically going to try to go through as many things as I can that are brought up specifically by Bill Nye, answering questions like, well, if you guys are right, how could there be hundreds of thousands of years worth of layering in the ice cores? And how could the Ark be seaworthy, considering that the Wyoming, it was a large wooden vessel, but it was smaller than the Ark, and it couldn't hold up on the open seas. So he brings up a lot of these kind of quibbles to try to poke hole in the creation model. We're going to try to look at as many of those as we can during the Bible class hour to show that the Bible model is scientifically defensible. We have no problem with the evidence from science. And interestingly, each one of these things you look at, you find out that much more, how much the Bible can be counted on. It's amazing in its accuracy. And then we'll end up answering the question, why would someone want to be a Christian? In other words, what are the perks of being a Christian? It would make someone want to go ahead and follow the evidence that we've talked about and make the decision to go ahead and become a Christian. All right, thank you again. There's been a lot of material today, and I tell you, I'm probably more worn out than you are, so I keep my right hip starts hurting because I stand like this so much. So then I have to remember to do this, and I forget. I start hurting. But anyway, so I appreciate your attention, and just know I'm hurting too. But I think that this is good stuff that I feel like you need to know. These are the kind of things that I'm hearing, and I feel like our brother needs to be ready to deal with this stuff. So hopefully you feel more equipped to deal with it. Hopefully you took a lot of notes, and hopefully eventually I'll get this in some kind of a format where whenever all the stuff that went over your head, you didn't have time to soak it up, you can go back and listen again on DVD. We just haven't had time to do that yet. But you're actually recording this, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. So you go back and soak some of it up then. Okay. So I'm going to stay after a little bit if you have any questions, or if you have any questions about the materials as well. Thank you again.